everybody. Welcome to the Wednesday Instagram Live Tablas Creek broadcast. I'm Jason Haas, as always. I am super excited for my guest today. It's one of my oldest kind of wine business friends, Jordan Mackay, author, writer, great all around, super knowledgeable, great guy, is going to be joining me. So I'm going to invite him in just a few minutes. But for now, as I usually do while we wait for people to join, I'm going to give you a little tour of what's going on here. And you may notice my background is a little different. I am in the cellar instead of out on the patio because it is our first 100-degree day of the year today. And I was a little worried that my iPhone would shut down if I sat out there for half an hour. Okay, so a few pictures. I thought that we would start with a little photo tour of Scruffy Hill. So this is our oldest head-trained, dry-farmed hillside block. So these vines are like 15 years old. And so it was designed as a vineyard block designate. So it's got a series of varieties. I'm going to show you Grenache and Syrah and Mourvedre. But this is a view looking up the side of that hill. So let's look first at Grenache. So we are through flowering. We are well into fruit set. You can see the Grenache berries. Grenache is always one of the more advanced. The Grenache berries are kind of pea-sized and growing well. And the vine itself is looking great. I mean, the Grenache always is one of the varieties that looks happiest. So this is what the Grenache vines, one of the representative ones, looks like right now. Those trunks are, they're like 6 inches thick. Super exuberant and vigorous. So compare that to Syrah. So the Syrah berries, even though Syrah will be picked earlier, the berries are smaller. You can see that classic kind of cylindrical berry shape or cluster shape. And the vine itself, we have to we have to train a little differently because it tends to be a little more sprawling. So we train the central trunk up higher and then let it sprawl down kind of like an umbrella as the clusters mature. And then finally, one more variety, got to show you Mourvedre. The Mourvedre is the last to sprout, the last to flower, the last to get picked. And the berries themselves are still tiny. We just finished flowering maybe 10 days ago. And the vines themselves are modest. They're not as big and bushy and exuberant as Grenache or Syrah, but they look great. Everything looks good. We've had a really kind of friendly first half of summer so far. No real heat spikes. I mentioned that today's our first 100-degree day, but things look great out there, and I think they are in really good shape to withstand any heat that comes. One photo that I thought was kind of cool. This is the border between Mourvedre on the left and Grenache on the right. You can see how bushy and exuberant the Grenache is compared to the Mourvedre. Other things going on here. We've got, in the cellar, we are putting together the blends, particularly the Esprit and the other things that we decided on from the 2020s. So we have all our barrels down. We will be putting these into foudres that we have emptied with our recent bottlings. You can see that candle written onto the tag there. That's a sign that it's clean and sterilized. And then in our tasting room, we are in the process of finishing our tasting room renovations to be able to reopen inside. We put in wider countertops so that people can sit there with their knees comfortably under the bar tops, and we'll have people be able to choose between bar seating and outdoor table seating. So we should be ready to go. We're hoping 4th of July weekend. If you want to see more pictures or hear more about what we're doing, check out the blog, which I wrote this week. So I'm going to stop sharing, and then I'm going to invite Jordan to join me. There we go. I just sent the record. So he's going to be joining me, I'm assuming, from where he lives up in Napa. Hey, how you doing, Jordan?
How are you?
Doing great. How about you?
Good. You got my whole face on there?
I've got your whole face. I got a little more your ceiling maybe than you want, but
let me see.
It's all good.
My ceiling is the worst part about the.
Super cool. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for hopping on today for this.
Well,
I'm wearing a shirt from the last place that we saw each other a couple years ago in person
oh yes, that's right.
when you were in New York on a book tour, I think, and I was there doing a retrospective tasting for our 30th anniversary.
Yeah,
Um,
that was wonderful to overlap with you,
Unexpected. It was great. I
and
feel like that's the kind.
possibly the next place we're going to see each other again as well.
Right. So you have breaking news here that you might be moving. You will be moving to the Northeast.
We are
Okay.
moving.
But I'm getting ahead of myself. I usually like to start these conversations by asking people kind of tell their story of how they got into the world of wine. So what's your journey?
Well, it starts back when I was very young, and at around age 10, actually. I didn't come from my parents drank wine, but they were not connoisseurs by any stretch of the imagination, you know. But I was an avid reader, which probably doesn't surprise people since I became a writer. But back then, at age 10, I discovered the James Bond books by Ian Fleming. And I read them before I ever saw the James Bond movies. And I guess at 10, I was not quite old enough to understand, James Bond's, wonderful, sophistication between the sheets or Cold War politics. And, but I loved food, and I was very impressed with his knowledge around the dinner table and with wines, and cocktails and spirits, which play a large role in the book. So I was, wanting to emulate. Oh, I was also interested in handguns at the time. Anyway, so I started reading first wine books, at that young age, and my parents would let me sip theirs, and I got to sip their gin and tonics and their scotches, and I drank coffee with them, heavily diluted with milk. But anyway, so I was on the track early, and then I just sort of stayed with it. I didn't continue exactly on that curve going up, but in college, I remember I would procrastinate my studies when I'm in the library by going to the old wine book section and reading all these musty old books by British wine writers, of the early 20th century. And then it just kind of went on from there. And then, I became just sort of a general journalist, growing up in Austin, Texas. And I wanted to become a food writer, but my knowledge of wine, which was just self-taught mostly, either working in restaurants, tasting groups, a lot of reading, that became a niche that editors just suddenly asked me to fill, because wine was, 20 years ago, wine was just starting to really enter the American consciousness in a bigger way. And so it ended up being a great niche for me to fill. And that just accelerated my learning.
And I think the first time that we met, you were out here for Hospice du Rhône,
Mm-hmm.
and your credential at that point was for the Austin American Statesman.
Yeah. I was a writer in Texas at Texas Monthly Magazine, just doing general stuff, not really about wine or food, but I wrote one article about wine for them because it was my interest, and it was about Texas wine.
Right.
And the editors there, in typical fashion, sour grapes, because my topic was sort of like, why do Texas wines suck? What here are a couple of people who are trying something different to make them better, which was like, instead of planting Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, planting Tempranillo and Sangiovese, trying some other things. So anyway, that article got me the attention of Food and Wine magazine, that just cold called me and asked me if I wanted to write for them. And then a friend at the Austin newspaper asked me if I wanted to start a column for them, because he said, I know you've been writing a lot about wine, which was one article, But those were the days. And so, yeah, that's how I got started. Mm-hmm.
So what were those wine books? Do you remember any of the specific titles of the wine books that you were reading, like in those early years, like when you were a kid or in college?
I can't remember exactly. I remember, of course, there was Alexis Lachine, his book about wine. Maybe it was Wines of France, And then there were Notes on a Cellar Book, that famous old book about one of the first examples of wine writing. I can't remember the guy's name. I still have it over on my shelf. I found a copy. So I just remember, in typical wine person, enophile fashion, I remember the smell of the book more than I remember the label. Yeah,
Cool. Yeah, Alexis Lachine was an old friend of my dad's. They used to travel around France together in when my dad was doing buying trips, and Lachine would use this as opportunities to meet the producers and taste through cellars, and used to have some fun stories.
How great would that have been? And I still like those old books, because I like to sometimes, when I'm searching for inspiration or just want to unearth the sort of the classical approach to some of these wineries, I love to see what they had to say 100 years ago.
So there's somebody who one of the comments is, we love wine book recommendations. Do you have a couple of wine books that you have found like super inspirational or seminal or otherwise indispensable?
Yes, indeed I do. So I mean, I'm, of course I care about writing a lot too. I care about the craft of writing, and there's a lot of wine books that I see where the writing, there's a lot of information, but I'm sort of indifferent to the style of writing or the level of thinking there. So a couple of books that have really impacted me were, of course, Andrew Jeffords' The Wines of France, or The New France, it was called. And that's just still a great book. And again, I love the analytical way that he approaches wines and understanding not just individual wines, but movements, wines as regionally, culturally. In that same vein, unfortunately, I don't think he's writing much these days, if at all, was Matt Kramer, who was a long time columnist for the Wine Spectator. But his book, especially, even if you've not read, or you're well beyond introductory wine books, his Making Sense of Wine is a true triumph. It's so interesting, and he presents lots of ways to think about and analyze wine that are different than just sort of swirling the glass. And then also his book, Making Sense of Burgundy, which is long out of print. And if you can find a copy, they sell for between $200 and $400, I think, these days. And anyway, that was essential for me on my first couple of trips to Burgundy. I read it before, I took it with me. And also wonderful essays on the on terroir and ways to think about terroir. And Matt just did some really amazing work going back and imagining what it would have been like for the monks to work in the vineyards, and what, he talks about the lack of noise that would have been there, and how they might have approached listening to their own vineyards, because there wasn't car noise or planes or anything else. And so a lot of really neat analysis like that. So those are a couple of my favorites. And of course, Kermit Lynch's book, Adventures on the Wine Trail, was just inspirational to show you how wine can be a travelogue and how you could think about it. He did such a wonderful job. That was very inspirational for me. Yeah.
It's great that you mentioned Matt's books, because I miss his column too. That was always the first column that I would open the Spectator to read.
Oh my God. It was the only, one of the only like can't miss things about Wine Spectator, no offense, but I always, he wrote with strong opinions, but he always had very sound reasoning,
And he always had something to say. Like that was the thing I remember, is that they like a lot of wine columns, like you're rarely surprised by wine columns. They can be helpful, they can be kind of inspiring, but they're rarely surprising. And yet I felt like one of his real strengths is that he would write things that like had never occurred to me, and then I would want to follow that journey, which is cool.
Yeah, I really miss his writing a lot. I wish he was still going.
So did you know when you were starting to write like newspaper articles and magazine articles about wine that you wanted to write books?
Um, no, no, not at all. You know, when I first started, and first, in fact, I was so I loved, you know, I remember even as I was just really getting enthusiastic about wine as an amateur. I was a journalist, but not writing about it. I loved, you know, I would wait until Wednesday. If we remember, Wednesdays were when the newspaper food sections would come out, and so I wouldn't miss the New York Times. This was, I mean, it's amazing how old I am now, but there was, or Eric Asimov, there was Frank Pryle.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed Frank Pryle's column. I remember Eric Asimov just wrote the 25 and under restaurant review.
Yeah.
But there was also a guy in California. He wrote a lot for the LA Times named Rod Smith, who was another beautiful writer. He's passed away now, but I I would read these in good writing and great knowledge, and it would never occur to me that I would become a colleague of that. You know, I couldn't even dream that big. So no, so that didn't start. And even then, I was reluctant when I first got my opportunities. I still couldn't imagine myself truly having this career. So I went off to work a Harvard in New Zealand because I was also depressed about, bad breakup that actually caused me to leave Austin finally, which was great, and move out west. But I thought maybe I meant to write about wine, not or to make wine, not write about, or not write at all. But then, one harvest in Marlborough, just crushing Sauvignon Blanc 24/7 for a month was enough to turn me off your line of work. And so but then after a while, I was getting going, writing about wine. And one thing that's wonderful about this business is that, education was ramping up so much, and wine regions all around the world needed to educate the journalists of, especially the new generation. And so there were lots of opportunities to travel to places like Rioja and, Puglia and Tuscany and Beaujolais. And just have intensive weeks of education, especially since I was making like $20,000 a year from my little tiny columns that I wrote. So that was great. And then just eventually, once, after a few years, after 5, 6, 7 years, you realize, it's important to do something a little more substantial than just writing articles. And so I began to kind of go in search of a book opportunity. Yeah. To very long-winded response to you.
So just to answer the question that we got from the Rioja _Spain, yes, Andrew Jefford is the author of the new France books that you liked so much, right?
Yeah, and then John Bonet had another book. It's supposed to come out called The New France, or The New France, but I think that's much more looking at the natural wine world. Right. Andrew Jefford is very much a classical France. Yeah.
So talk a little bit about what your most recent projects have been. I feel like I missed a couple of books. Like I remember seeing the first couple, and then went and looked and saw that you had at this point like 6. Is that
6 or 7? I can't even remember. Yeah. So I started off writing, doing wine books, but at some point, and I think this is just that, I'm as a journalist, I wanted to. I have other interests beyond wine. I love wine, but part of what drew me to wine in the first place was this sort of multidisciplinary aspect of it. Understanding that the fact that it brings together agriculture and fermentation and culture and art and all of that. So after a while, I was like, I need to not just write about wine. I also, like most great wine people, wine lovers that I know, we also all love food. Most of us love to cook so much. And so that actually, I found my way back into the food writing that I kind of wanted to do at the beginning. And so I got a chance to write a book with a guy that I met in Austin called Aaron Franklin, who's one of the most famous barbecue guys in the whole world. And so I went back, and a big departure from my wine writing was was Franklin Barbecue, which turned out to be a big hit book and sold and continues to sell a lot of copies, which was incredibly fortunate thing that happened to me, actually. Because wine books, as much as I love them, and I have many shelves of them, don't tend to sell a ton of copies. Yeah.
And you've gotten a chance to work with Raj Parr on some projects too, which I think that must have been kind of a fun.
Oh yeah.
Like again, a little different from the other things that you've done.
Well, my what really changed, even when you met me and I was writing columns for San Francisco Magazine and stuff like that, what opened up the greater world of wine to me, the one in which you grew up in more, with the world of fine wine and of sort of French wine that wasn't very available to just sort of young journalists who I was getting hit up a lot by Australia in those days. But the world of fine wine happened once I started to kind of get involved with the sommelier scene in San Francisco. And Raj was part of that, as was Larry Stone, now of Lingua Franca in Oregon, and of course my wife, Christy Dufault, who was a sommelier at Gary Danko at the time. And so getting involved in those tasting circles allowed me to sort of level up much faster than if I had stayed on my own track, because I got to have, it would have taken me a lot longer to get real knowledge of some of the, Burgundy, for instance, Bordeaux, and learn the cool Northern Rhone producers, which I did. So then Raj and we became great friends, and we teamed up and we wrote Secrets of the Sommelier, and then later Atlas of Taste. And again, Secrets of the Sommelier won a James Beard Award on our first try, which was also an incredible stroke of luck. But that ended up being a significant book. And and then that led me to my food books. And it's always I've wanted to kind of bring wine and food together.
Was there a wine that was for you kind of an eye-opening, aha, oh, here's what it's all about kind of moment?
Yeah. It was Austin, where I grew up at the time, had more of an Italian wine culture than a French wine culture at that time, and California we have. But I remember it was a 1990 Bruno Giacosa Folletto Reserva, a Barolo, that it was just, it's a longer story for my memoir, but I just remember secretly opening that bottle of wine with a girlfriend in a movie theater, sneaking it, and then and she pulled out the one glass that we were going to share, and I became so paranoid that we were going to get kicked out of the theater, because as far as I could tell, the whole thing just filled up with the aroma of roses, and it was so beautiful, this wine. And of course I was really in love, and it was Fellini film. But anyway, that I remember that, just thinking like, oh, this is the ethereal thing that wine can be. And that was definitely one of my first epiphany wines.
And what era was this? What year?
The wine would have been fairly young at that time, surprisingly, because those wines can age 30, 40, 50 years. This would have been about 1997 or 8, yeah. So, and then also another Italian wine I had, it was an Amarone, which appealed to my youthful palate at the time. And I was in a restaurant, again, in the same era, and their signature dish was this roasted duck with this port wine prune sauce. So we're talking heavy, rich food on the sweet side a little bit. And it was paired with this Amarone that was just magically connected with that port fig sauce. And that was my first sort of big food and wine epiphany, where I said, oh my gosh, this is a synergy that I have to pursue.
Cool. I love that. Love both of those stories. So we sort of teased at the beginning that you're just a couple months away from making a move from Napa to the Northeast. You're going to be in the Hudson Valley.
Mm-hmm.
Talk a little bit about that. How is the shape of your life going to change with that move?
Well, very interesting. I'll just say that I'm moving mostly because my wife is transferring. She's a teacher at the Culinary Institute, and she's leaving their Napa Valley Greystone campus to go to their mothership, which is in Hyde Park, New York. So I'm sort of getting to go along for the ride. But I will say that, sort of again, going to my sort of broad, panorama of interests, that even when I moved up here with her in the about 4 years ago, my plan was not to just stay in the Napa Valley. As much as it's a very beautiful place, it's so focused on wine and food that and San Francisco turns out not to be as easily accessible as I wish it was. And so anyway, I'm just going to, broaden my horizons, but it should be really interesting. One, I mean, of course, I've spent a lot of time in New York, but I haven't lived in that area as a wine and food writer. So I can't wait to see what comes up with that. As far as a couple of years ago, we did visit the Finger Lakes, and I found some wines to really be excited about up there. And it's a difficult place to grow wine, but sometimes those have the greatest potential, and so that should be very, very interesting. And then, all the other things that go along with wine. We love cheese. And so, we did a cheese tour of Vermont once, kind of a farmstead cheese tour, and lots of great dairy up there. There's lots of great agriculture farms for great vegetables to cook with. So I think it's going to be a really exciting time, and to go meet, I think the Hudson Valley is full of, as far as I can tell, of craftspeople and artisans and writers, and it just should be sort of a little bit more of a wider spectrum of humanity than what I find in Napa Valley.
I think you will for sure. Did your Vermont tour take you to Grafton, to the Grafton Village Cheese Company?
Yes.
Because that's like 10 minutes from where I grew up. So
I can't believe you grew up in Vermont. It's very sparse. I mean, sparsely populated. I was surprised,
I grew up in a town of 2,700 people, which was larger than any of the other towns nearby, to the point that it was the site of the Union High School for our town and 5 other smaller towns that were too small to support their high school.
Yeah.
And so even with all 6 of those towns combined, there were still only like 60 kids in each grade.
Wow.
And of course, being born in 1973, I was one of 5 Jasons in my grade of 60 kids, half of whom were girls.
Oh, yeah.
It is very rural. There's a lot more trees than there are people there. But that can also be a really wonderful thing.
Well, which is great. I'm looking forward also to living in a place where it rains in the summertime.
Yeah.
As I look out my office window here, the hillside right behind us, which was once covered with a verdant forest, is now covered with burnt matchsticks, of trees. And so I'm looking forward to that. Also, I've been to Montreal just twice, but I love Quebec, and I would like to go up there and see Nova Scotia and places like that, all the way in Maine. It's just going to be fun to explore a new thing, even though there's a lot, of course, I'll miss about California. It's definitely bittersweet.
Yeah, we go back most summers. I mean, we went back every summer until last year, and we're going to be leaving in a couple of weeks to go back this year. And it's always it's shockingly green when we leave California in the middle of the summer and land in New England, and everything seems alive. And you come back to California and it is so stark. I mean, the sun is so bright and the hillsides are so dry, and there is green, there's trees, there's vines, but it really feels like everything deserves some applause if it manages to live through a California summer. Whereas in Vermont, it's anything will grow, and it's just a question of taming it enough to be able to live alongside it. And then, of course, you're there in the winter, and everything is white and brown, and you wonder if anything will ever sprout again. And in California, it's green and lush.
No, it's true.
So,
Nice to see Michael Tyrion's name on there. He reminds me of Maine and his blueberry wine project. Maybe I'll get to go stain my fingers and help him harvest sometime. Let me ask you: is there, one of the things that I've always loved about Tablas Creek was your dry farming and your commitment, to that.
Hold on for a second. Sorry, fan went on in the cellar,
Yes.
and all of a sudden I couldn't hear you at all. Carry on.
I was asking, that I always loved Tablas Creek's dry farming and your emphasis on that and trying to train your vines to survive this California climate. Will you be able to? This is, one of the driest records in recent memory. Do you think you'll be able to continue dry farming this year?
Yeah,
Okay.
it seems like the vineyard seems like it's in really good shape. This area was a little less dry compared to normal than a lot of the rest of California because the one big atmospheric river storm that hit California parked itself right over Paso Robles for a couple of days.
Wow.
So we got almost 13 inches of rain in 2 days in January, and then like 4 inches the whole rest of the winter.
Mm-hmm.
But still, 16 or 17 inches, that's enough.
Yeah.
That's more than we got in most of those years in that drought between 12 and 16, where we were averaging like 14 or 15 inches a year.
Yeah.
So, we should be okay. The vineyard looks great. We went into this with pretty good vine health. All of the work that we've done with the sheep, building more organic matter in the soil that helps it hold more moisture.
That's
so
it.
We feel pretty good about things, actually.
That's fantastic. No, I know. I wish more people would learn that if you cultivate your soil, really well, that it's the organic matter helps hold an incredible amount of water that builds year over year.
Yeah.
So,
no, it's all about that. I mean, we've honestly, in recent years, thought more about farming the soil than we have farming the vines themselves. And you're totally right. You do that, it takes care of you.
yeah. Oh, that's really great to hear. And I enjoyed your catching up session before I came on. The vines are looking great over there. I wish I was going to get down to taste with you before I left, but I think I know I'll be back in California a lot.
Yeah, and whatever. As you know, I'm in the Northeast a lot. It's it'll be fun to see whether we run into each other more here or there.
Yeah, I know it really will.
Okay, I've got one quick story and then one more question for you before we wrap, because we've been half an hour, which whatever, I can do this all afternoon, but I imagine you probably have things to do. So first, the little story that I love, because it was like my mom's favorite story ever of me working here, is when, and I can't even remember when it was, I got a call from you and you're like, I need a quote for a story and I need to talk to somebody who can speak in complete sentences. And I told my mom and she's like, okay, my work here is done. Like that was, so that's the story. The question I had is, like, what are you excited about now in wine? Like, if there were a couple things that you felt like you discovered or you'd gotten really turned on to that people might have overlooked and should really take a second look at, what would an idea or two of that be? Okay,
well, I mean, for your audience, gosh, that's a very good question. I, like a lot of people, I've been very entranced with the just the variety and the diversity of things coming out of Spain these days. I just think I wrote, like 15 years ago, I wrote a big story for the LA Times about the revolution in Spain, but that was a different revolution, but it continues to, evolve there. And just the recovery of really interesting white varieties, which I'm looking for all over the world, is just As much as I love Chardonnay, Chablis, and all that, I love to find the Godeo of the Ribera Sacra, and and things like that. And so I think I love just finding new Spanish whites, especially from that northeast corner, or from all over in the north. Also in that, I think coming your way, I I I'm interested in finding really good balanced aromatic, not too heavy Grenache. I love a great Grenache, served at the proper temperature, but that finds balance. It's not too alcoholic, not extracted, and when that Grenache is when it's beautifully farmed and beautifully done, can make a very, very seductive wine. Which yeah.
I think a lot of people mistakenly think of Grenache as being this like big bruiser of a wine, whereas really it can accumulate a lot of sugar. There are some of them that can be pretty alcoholic, but it's a wine that's not opaque. It's got translucency. It's got beautiful acids, and so particularly if you can get it on a site that's going to express some minerality from the soils, it can be this kind of crunchy, lifted red wine that has this really lovely elegance to it, as well as the juiciness that people probably expect.
Yeah, and I love those light colored reds that carry that still have some weight, and are also aromatic. For instance, I love finding really good sort of darker, more profound rosés, like Cheris from the Mackay, or Champagne. I love these rosés that can age. And then drinking them with just more of a white wine temperature. I really enjoy those, especially this kind of year. Very very versatile as well.
Awesome. Thank you for the suggestions.
Sure.
I hope people pay attention, because those are all great ones.
Yeah.
Okay, but before we wrap, if people want to follow you or learn more about the things that you're working on, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, I guess it's through Instagram. So it would be I think I'm the real Jordan Mackay. And I have not been very good about my social media for the last year, but I'm trying to get back. So this will be an inspiration for me, Jason. Since to put more of my life and work on there. And I'm working on new books, a new book with Aaron Franklin on grilling and smoking. I just finished the draft of a book about this great bar in Brooklyn called Maison Premiere, and that book is mostly about cocktails and oysters. And so my work continues to be diverse, and I'm working on new wine features as well, a new thing for Decanter and all that. So I'll try to keep all that going. Oh, and last thing. I had a really good feature, food and wine, last on one of my favorite things, called The Long Lunch, which is a long boozy lunch. And so if everyone can go and look it up in the May Food and Wine, it's a fun article.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you, Jordan.
Thank you.
I wish you well in your move. I look forward to seeing you in the green mountains of the Northeast, as well as hopefully out here in California before too long.
Love it. Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you. And thank you, everybody who joined me. And I will see you all in 2 weeks.
Great.